Before we begin, take a moment. If you find this story interesting, leave a comment with the number 1 and subscribe to support me. But if it's not quite your style, comment with the number 2 so I can improve and do better next time. Your feedback is my greatest motivation. The tale started unexpectedly for me. My name is Zephyr, and I'm 25 years old. I recently came home after spending a long period living and working overseas. I left at the age of 22 to pursue a job in a foreign location, and for 3 years, I could only communicate with my family via phone conversations. However, this time I chose to return to my hometown to see my family after such a long absence. When I entered the familiar home, the sensation of both familiarity and strangeness returned. My parents were overjoyed to see me again, and our entire family spent the first evening laughing and reminiscing about old memories, as well as eating the delicacies my mother prepared that I had much missed. What startled me the most was my younger sister, Maris. Maris was still a little attractive but bashful girl who preferred to hide behind me when she encountered people. However, when Maris emerged from her room to greet me, I was astounded by what I saw. She was now a mature lady, tall and confident. Her long hair was free, her eyes sparkled, and she smiled shyly yet warmly. It was an odd sensation, like meeting someone utterly new, yet somehow familiar. Maris smiled and remarked, "Zephyr, it's been a long time since I last saw you." Her voice, now full of maturity, surprised me. I grabbed her into a close hug. "When did you get so big?" I joked. "I no longer recognize you." Maris only giggled, her cheeks heated, and she said nothing further. I couldn't take my gaze away from her throughout the evening. Every motion Maris made brought back memories, but I also recognized how much she had changed. There was something about how she spoke, the way she laughed, that bewildered me, a mix of familiarity and something new, elusive. When night fell, I walked up to my room to relax after a hard trip. My mother still preserved my old room. Every aspect made me feel nostalgic. Tired, I decided to shower before retiring to bed. The warm water in the shower seemed to wash away all of my exhaustion from the long travel, leaving me feeling relieved and relaxed. After showering, I put on a loose t-shirt and lay down on the old bed, planning to snooze. But when the lights were turned out, the darkness and solitude caused my thoughts to wander. Images of my family from the past, particularly Maris, kept arriving in my head. I couldn't help but think about her, how she changed and the sweet yet harsh look she'd given me. I attempted to dismiss such ideas, telling myself that it was just an odd sensation to see my sister after so many years away. But the more I tried to forget, the more vividly her image appeared in my memory. I remembered Maris's modest grin and how she inclined her head slightly while listening to her parents converse. Every motion, every subtle expression appeared to be seared in my consciousness. Lying on the bed, I realized I was battling with my own feelings, but I eventually let everything go, leaving just a calm sensation in my heart, mingled with a little humiliation and anguish. Lying in the dark, I noticed that everything around me was so quiet that I could hear my own breathing. Yet, my mind was not at ease. I could not stop thinking about Maris and how she had changed so much in 3 years that I felt like I was meeting a whole different person. When we were younger, old memories of her would resurface. She used to follow me around, calling, "Brother Zephyr, wait for me." I remembered how she used to hide behind me when she was terrified, or how she would jump up and down with delight when I gave her modest things. Maris was no longer the young child she once was. The way she smiled, the gleam in her eyes, everything exuded confidence and charisma that I was unfamiliar with. I exhaled quietly and closed my eyes, hoping to go to sleep, but a light rap on the door interrupted me. "Brother Zephyr, are you still awake?" Maris's voice sounded gently from beyond the door. I sat up slightly, astonished. "Are you awake? What's up?" Maris strolled in, still wearing the modest nightgown that highlighted her small body. She grinned sheepishly while sitting on the edge of the bed. "I can't sleep," she muttered, clasping her hands together and avoiding my gaze as if she were thinking about something. "I simply wanted to chat with you for a moment. It's been a while since we last saw one another." I nodded, attempting to make my voice casual. "Yeah, it has been a while. So, what would you like to tell me?" We started speaking, at first, about ordinary stories, family, work, and each other's lives. Maris told me about her days at home with our parents, her schoolwork, and the small joys she had encountered. But the longer we spoke, the more I noticed that her eyes were occasionally hazy, as if she were afraid to communicate something. "Brother Zephyr," she paused abruptly, her palms clasped harder. "Do you believe that after living away for so long, two individuals can no longer understand one another?" Her question caused me to stop. I gazed at her, attempting to interpret her eyes. "I believe so," I said. "But if they continue to remain connected, everything will return to normal." Maris grinned slightly but not totally delighted. "I hope so." We sat there in the faint light, and the air abruptly changed. I could sense her presence and the warmth of her quiet breathing as she sat nearby, but that brought discomfort that I couldn't express. "Maris, what is wrong? Is anything upsetting you?" I asked gently, attempting to keep my voice calm. She didn't respond straight away, instead shaking her head slightly. "It's nothing, brother. I'm simply thinking too much." She stood up and smiled at me again. "Okay, I'm heading back to my room. I won't bother you anymore. Good night, brother." "Good night, Maris," I said. But my thoughts remained full of unresolved questions. When she went out and shut the door, I sat there for a time, peering into the darkness in front of me. An odd feeling emerged in my heart, both familiar and uneasy, as if something had changed between us, but I did not dare to confront it. I lay back on the bed but couldn't fall asleep. My thoughts kept returning to Maris's picture, her half-closed eyes, and her faint speech as she went. The way she stared at me was peculiar, as if she wanted to say something but didn't dare. Time went slowly. The quiet accentuated the unpleasant sensation in my heart. Finally, unable to stand the suffocation, I went to the kitchen for a drink in the hopes of improving my attitude. As I proceeded down the stairs, the low light from the living room prompted me to halt. I peeked through the half-open door and saw Maris sitting on the sofa, her knees pulled up, her arms holding a cushion. Her gaze was fixated on the TV screen, but her mind was plainly elsewhere. I stepped in carefully to avoid startling her. "Are you still awake?" I asked. Maris startled a bit and turned to face me, slightly ashamed. I couldn't sleep, so I came downstairs to watch TV for a while. I sat next to her, maintaining a comfortable distance. "What's wrong? You've been restless since I arrived home." She pursed her lips and looked down at her clenched fists. After a minute, she shook her head. "It's nothing, honey. I think it's simply unusual because you haven't been home in so long." I did not force her, but the atmosphere between us remained curiously strained. I glanced at Maris and recognized the adult features on her face, but I also saw something frail, as if she was hiding a secret she didn't want or couldn't reveal. "You know," I said, trying to lighten the tone, "when I first returned, I also felt uncomfortable. You've changed so much. It was like meeting a whole different person." Maris turned to face me, her eyes blazing with astonishment. "Is change good or bad, bro?" I smiled and tried to keep my voice light. "It's good. You've grown up, become more mature, and are quite attractive." Maris flushed at those comments and hastily turned aside, but she couldn't disguise the smile that appeared on her lips. "Thank you," she said softly, making it difficult to hear. There was a lengthy stillness, interrupted only by the low buzz of the television. Maris murmured quietly, breaking the silence. "Mr. Zephyr. I have a question for you, but I am concerned it may seem weird." I raised my eyebrow at her. "Ask." I vow to answer seriously. Maris chewed her lip as if thinking something over. Then exhaled deeply. "If two people were formerly quite close to each other, and one of them suddenly feels, is it unethical to have distinct opinions on the other person?" I hesitated. Her inquiry felt like a needle piercing the feelings I had been attempting to push aside since seeing her again. I didn't know how to respond, but I could feel her gaze waiting for an explanation. "I think my sentiments are never wrong, Maris, but how you act on them is what matters," I said slowly, attempting to keep my voice steady. Maris nodded slightly but did not say anything further. She turned back to stare at the TV screen, as if lost in contemplation. I refrained from interrogating her further, as she did not respond to my inquiries. However, my heart was pounding with each pulse. Part of me wanted to get away from this unpleasant situation, but another part of me couldn't stop looking at her. Finally, I stood up and tried to keep my voice normal. "Okay, I suppose I should go to bed. Don't stay up too late either. We still have plenty of time to speak tomorrow." Maris gave me a small nod. "Good night, brother." "Good night, Maris," I answered, but as I exited the living room, I couldn't help but notice that the calm between us was gradually being replaced by something neither of us wanted to mention. I returned to my room and softly closed the door, as if scared to disturb the house's stillness. However, the quiet simply made my thoughts more jumbled. Maris's question kept ringing in my mind, whirling like a spiral with no way out. If two people were formerly quite close, could one suddenly have a different opinion of the other? Was that wrong? The question, the way she looked at me, it all felt like an implicit confession. But it was enough to make me nervous and uneasy. I couldn't deny that, since seeing Maris again, I'd been in the same state of turmoil, which I didn't want to confess or even consider. However, her inquiry made those sentiments inescapable. I lay on the bed, eyes wide awake, staring at the ceiling, attempting to push away the jumbled thoughts. But Maris's picture remained vivid in my memory, her smile, her eyes, and the way she sat next to me on the sofa, bewildered but full of expectation. I continued to toss and turn for a considerable amount of time until the pain intensified. I decided to get up and go out on the balcony to get some fresh air. The streetlights created a shadow on the tranquil night, and the starry sky provided some peace, but not enough to calm the turbulence in my heart. As I stood there, I heard a faint sound coming from the stairs. I turned to see Maris standing there, her eyes uncertainly fastened on me. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered quietly, edging closer. "I noticed your door open and assumed you did as well." I nodded, trying to make things casual. "I simply came out here to catch some air." "Are you okay?" Maris stood next to me, her hand softly clutching the railing, and her gaze focused on the sky. "It's okay. It just feels odd that you've returned. There are so many feelings that I'm not sure how to handle." I listened silently, unsure what to say. There was something about her voice that made it hard for me to interrupt. "Zephyr," Maris continued, her voice faint and somewhat shaking. "Do you ever feel like the individuals closest to you might also cause the most confusion?" The question cut deep into my feelings. I turned to face her, her eyes waiting as if looking for something within me. "Maris," I began, unsure what to say. "I believe that our sentiments don't always proceed as planned. What counts is how we handle them. Do you understand what I mean?" Maris nodded, her gaze still fixed on me, but this time there was something different, an intimacy and struggle I couldn't express. She stood extremely close to me, her soft breath filling the air between us, narrowing the already thin space. I could feel my heart hammering, each pulse reverberating in my chest. Part of me wanted to back away. But another part of me couldn't stop looking at her. Maris, I spoke her name softly, my voice clogged with sorrow. But before I could say anything further, she drew closer. And the space between us was almost gone. I sensed her warmth, vulnerability, and strength intermingled, but like a jolt bringing me out of my perplexity, I stepped back, attempting to cling to what little reason I still had. Maris, we can't, I murmured, my voice quivering as I avoided looking at her squarely. You're my sister. This isn't correct. She gazed at me, her eyes full of feelings I couldn't understand. But she didn't say anything. She just nodded slightly and walked away, stepping back inside the house silently. I stood there, watching her form vanish, my heart full of uneasiness and bewilderment. I returned to my room and lay down on the bed, but sleep was far away. The stiff sensations would not let me go. Since my return, every moment of settlement between Maris and me had been fraught, leaving no detail left untouched. Her bashful grin when she first noticed me, her thoughtful questions, and the way she approached me on the balcony, it all seemed to be leading towards something I did not want to admit. The next morning, I awoke to the first light of the day streaming through the door. My body felt heavy after a night of nearly no sleep, but there was no time to ponder about it, since the aroma of boiling coffee from the kitchen reminded me that everyone had begun a new day. As I proceeded down the stairs, I noticed Maris standing by the essential oil brewing coffee. She was dressed casually in a loose t-shirt and pants, but she looked stunning nonetheless. Maris turned around to greet me with a soft smile, but I could see the peace in her eyes right away. "Good morning, brother," she murmured, her voice striving to seem casual. "I brewed some coffee. Do you want a cup?" "Yes, thank you," I said, trying not to express my appreciation. I sat down at the table, watching her insert the coffee powder into the ring, her fingers running delicately, which I imagined only I would notice. We sat across from one another, the mood silent yet full of unspoken words. I knew she wanted to say something, and I wanted to end the stillness. But every time I opened my lips, I couldn't think of a decent excuse. In the end, Maris was the one who spoke. "Mr. Zephyr," she said, "I apologize if I made you feel uncomfortable last night. I did not want to cause any problems." I gazed at her calmly, seeing honesty in her eyes, but also the grief she was attempting to conceal. "It's okay, Maris. It was just that I wasn't sure what to say either. Everything was so unexpected." She nodded and set down the coffee powder in front of her. "I understand. Perhaps I'm confused about me too." I wasn't sure how to answer her remarks. They were an admission I was not prepared to confront. I couldn't hide indefinitely. I couldn't let her feel alone in her individuality. "Listen, Maris," I started, my voice low. "We are brothers. Time and change may make things weird, but I think they will pass. Everything will work out as long as we respect each other." Maris gave me a kind look as if she were about to say something but then stopped. After a while, she nodded slightly. "You're correct. Perhaps I'm simply thinking too much." After breakfast, Maris avoided me for the whole day. She conducted most of the housework, including cleaning and rearranging the living room. I didn't contact her either, believing that we both needed time to work out our feelings. But the distance didn't reduce the stress. It simply made me more restless. When my parents indicated that they were going to see a friend and would be returning for the night, I saw the situation becoming more problematic. Now it was only Maris and myself in the house. I had planned to go up to my room early to avoid any unpleasant circumstances, but then I heard a soft knock on the door. "Maris?" I called out, opening the door to find her standing there, her slender face chilly and focused on a project. "Can you come out and speak with me for a moment?" she asked quietly, almost in a plea. I wanted to reject her, but my eyes made it difficult. I nodded and stepped outdoors. We strolled down to the living room, which was filled with lovely golden light. Maris sat on the sofa. And I sat a safe distance away. I simply wanted to. Maris began, her voice trailing off. I don't want you to think I'm a stranger or that I'm attempting to do something improper. I just can't control my feelings. When I heard those words, my heart fluttered. I wanted to interrupt her, but I wasn't sure what to say. Zephyr, Maris continued, turning to face me. I know what I'm feeling is wrong, but I'm not sure how to stop. Her comment stabbed deep into my heart, but it also brought to light something I had been attempting to keep hidden. I wanted to soothe her and assure her that everything would be okay, but how could I when I wasn't sure of my own feelings? I was ready to say something to her when she stood up and turned to face me. I should not have thought about this. I apologize, she said, and with that, she swiftly walked away, leaving me sitting there again with conflicting feelings. I sat motionless in the living room. The lovely yellow light unable to warm the chill that surrounded my heart. Maris's words, the feelings she exhibited, and my own powerlessness were all rising up like a cork poised to burst. I was compelled to hold myself accountable. How could I have allowed this to happen? Part of me wanted to leave the home, away from everything. So I didn't have to confront her gaze or accept what I was feeling, but something else kept me back, preventing me from leaving. I didn't want to abandon her in this state. I didn't want her to feel lonely or rejected. I rose, walked carefully up the stairs, and paused in front of her room door. The door was just slightly open. And the light from her room's table lamp shone dimly but warmly into the corridor. I knocked lightly, so quietly that only I could hear it. Maris, can I come in? There was no response. I opened the door to see Maris sitting on the edge of the bed, her head lowered and hands folded in her lap. She did not glance up at me, but I could tell she was aware of my presence. Maris. I replied, coming to sit next to her on the bed. I'm not sure what to say to make you feel better, but I'm here. And I want you to know you don't have to suffer alone. Maris turned to face me. Her eyes brimming with tears, yet none fell. Zephyr, I know I'm wrong, but I can't shake this sensation. I've tried, but whenever I see you, I can't stop thinking about you. I took a long breath. Attempting to relax myself. I realized there was nothing I could say to make her or myself feel better. But I had to do something, say anything to save us from falling further into the overwhelming feelings we were experiencing. Maris, you are my sister, I murmured, my voice low but firm. These sentiments might be the result of being separated for so long, which makes everything strange. But it is critical that we remember who we are and what part we play in one another's lives. Maris remained silent, just staring at me, her eyes full of anguish but also yearning for some hope. You are correct, she said softly. However, I don't know how to forget this emotion. I just want things to go back to how they were when I was your little sister, and you were the big brother I idolized. I placed my hand on her shoulder, a soft yet reassuring stroke. Maris. I desire that too, and I believe time will help you get over it. I'll be here to help you rediscover what we once had, brotherly affection and intimacy. Without crossing the boundary that we both know cannot be crossed. Maris nodded and rested her head softly on my shoulder, as if seeking comfort. In that moment, we sat like that for a long time. Neither of us saying anything, simply allowing the space surrounding us to merge into the quietness we both needed to relax. Then I rose up and gave her a polite smile. Maris, go to sleep. Tomorrow's a new day. I believe we'll be all right. Maris smiled slightly, sorrowful but relieved. Good night, Mr. Zephyr. Thank you. I left her room, locked the door. And felt as if I had crossed a fine but essential line. Everything was still wild inside of me, but I knew I'd made the proper decision to stick to what was right, despite the challenging feelings. That night, I lay in bed feeling lighter for the first time after days of battle. I knew the journey ahead would be difficult. But at least we had begun to take the first steps toward healing, for her and myself. This incident taught me a fundamental lesson: emotions are a normal part of being human. But how we confront and manage them decides everything. Sometimes we get caught up in opposing emotions, especially when unexpected developments disrupt accustomed perspectives. But the most essential thing is to examine the situation objectively and select the best course of action. I've learned that love is more than simply an emotion. It's also a responsibility to others and to oneself. Protecting important boundaries, especially when challenged, is the only way to maintain the respect and connections you value in life. You will experience intense and difficult emotions, which may lead to confusion about yourself and your relationships. When this occurs, remember that emotions are normal. But actions should be guided by intelligence and moral principles. Take the time to understand your feelings rather than criticizing or acting on them. Respect crucial interpersonal limits, since they serve as the foundation for attachment and trust. If you are feeling lost, reach out to trustworthy family members or friends, or listen to your heart, but always keep your heart in mind. Self-control not only keeps you from making mistakes, but it also safeguards the vital connections you value. My narrative concludes here. With indelible lessons learned and a sense of relief that everything has been correctly observed and managed. Life goes on, and I feel that with sincerity and respect, we will retain this unique family tie. Thank you for hearing our story. If you find it fascinating and relevant, please show your support by liking it. See you in the future video. I hope everyone is always happy.